Alright, hello everyone. This is going to be a video detailing the new Puppet Ganon skip for the original Wind Waker that was figured out by Tanjo yesterday. Or at least the component that makes this work was figured out by Tanjo yesterday. So this skip pretty much works the same way that it does in Wind Waker HD for a while. So at the top of the room here, in the Puppet Ganon room, there's a warp pot. And around the warp pot, there are 3 morphs. Now, normally you don't get a good enough angle to be able to shoot the warp pot with a fire arrow, because the top of the warp pot is a wooden lid, so it can be burned off. But what you can do in this instance, and what you've been able to do in Wind Waker HD for a long time, is you've been able to shoot the morphs that are surrounding the warp pot with a fire arrow through the floor. Because the arrow travels so far in one frame that it actually can go through the entire floor and still manage to hit the morphs that are surrounding the warp pod. The morphs will catch on fire, or at least the one morph you're aiming at will catch on fire. And during its death animation, it will bounce over and touch the warp pot lid, which will burn it off, right? And once the lid is burned off, you can just go through the warp pod here and appear at the top of the room, thus skipping Puppet Ganon. The reason this didn't work in the original Wind Waker is because the warp pot lid is actually not loaded when you're all the way down here at the bottom of the room, whereas it's pretty much always loaded as long as you're looking at it in Wind Waker HD. But what Tanjo figured out is that the warp pot actually is loaded if you look at it with either the Pictobox or the telescope, right? So by simply just taking out the Pictobox and looking up, the warp pot lid is now loaded. And thankfully the warp pot is so high up that there is actually enough time for us to shoot a fire arrow with the bow, and then take out the Pictobox, look upwards, and have the lid be loaded so that when we shoot the morph with the fire arrow, the morph actually touches the loaded lid and burns off the lid. So of the 3 morphs that are up there, there are 2 morphs that this works with that are close enough to the warp pot to actually touch the lid. And so the setup for the first one here is we want to get all the way into this corner. And then you see the Japanese text that's next to the B button on screen here as I go into first person. It's pretty hard to see just because this room is really dark. But I'm lining up the leftmost Japanese character, the Mo. The very bottom of it is lined up with the right side of the black portion of the pillar that it's next to, because the pillar is sort of split into 3 sections. Again, it's very hard to see this, but this is basically what the lineup is. So once we have that angle, we just do 3 rolls, 3 dry rolls forward, like this, and then take out the bow. Shoot a fire arrow, and then right after we shoot it, take out the Pictobox, look up, and we look up in time so that we can make sure that the pot lid is loaded. You know that it works because you'll hear the sound of the morph getting killed. If you don't hear that sound, then your lineup was not entirely correct. And then for the second morph, we have to travel all the way around the room here to this side, and then get in this corner here with a bunch of backflips. For this setup, we're again using the same sort of black part of the pillar that's near the Japanese return text on the B button, except this time I'm lining up the leftmost edge of the second character, the Do, the middle character, I guess in this case, with the very right side of the black portions. So the middle character is just basically right up against the darker portion of the pillar right there. And then with this setup, it's 2 dry rolls and then 1 targeted slash. And then just aim all the way up again with the bow, perfectly straight up. Shoot the fire arrow, and then quickly look up with the Pictobox. And then if you got good RNG, because there unfortunately is RNG to this trick, you will successfully warp away to the top of the Puppet Ganon room. So thankfully I got lucky in this explanation here. The reason this is RNG is because the morphs actually do not die in a consistent way when they're hit with a fire arrow. The morph only has like a 1 in 3 chance of successfully getting the correct death animation to burn off the warp pod lid, which is where the RNG for this trick comes in. So, unfortunately, the end of both all dungeons and 100% runs will be RNG, so that's going to be fun. But yeah, so this can be used for all dungeons and 100%. It can't be used for any percent because any percent doesn't have the hook shot to get out of bounds with in the Puppet Ganon room. So, yeah. Anyway, hope you guys understand what we're doing now with this Puppet Ganon skip. So, thank you for watching.